Welcome back. Jason Gregor Show on Sports 1440, Oilers Nation YouTube and Facebook, as always, presented by PlayAlberta.ca, where you can get in the game, use the promo code Gregor50, and you'll get a free $50 play at PlayAlberta.ca. And it is time now for edition number 2 of the business of sports. Of course, we have 35 years as a player agent. Ritch Winter joins us once again. Ritch, how you doing?
Good, Jason. How are you? A little cold compared to last week, but it's okay.
Yeah, well, hey, we're in Edmonton. There's a lot of snow, so at least we have snow when it's cold, because there's nothing worse than having cold and no snow.
I love the snow. Yeah, totally.
I'm a big believer in it. And our guest today, the business of sports, we have lots of different topics we'll touch on, but when we get a guest like this to talk about the business really of hockey from a managerial perspective, did it for almost 4 decades. Of course, started out as a scout, was assistant GM, then of course went on to be the GM of the Detroit Red Wings, won 4 Stanley Cups, also came in as a GM of the Edmonton Oilers, made the playoffs all 5 seasons, came to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final last year, and now works for the NHL. Ken Holland, also Hall of Famer. Pretty long resume. Ken, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
Good. Nice to be with you guys.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you. How has it been your first few months without being a general manager? Is it a hard adjustment, or you kind of getting used to not running a team?
It's different. Obviously, I was a manager for 27 years. My wife and I have spent a lot of time together, and watching games every night, like I always did, I guess, but certainly different.
So in the business of sport, Ken, we'll get into some original signings and fun stories you've had, but you started out as a scout and, you worked your way up. You've talked to a lot of GMs. Do you still feel at the end of the day, like is having a good scouting background imperative to being a good GM?
No, I don't think so, Jason. I think that there's a number of different ways. I think you probably got to have a bunch of different elements in your management team. My background was scouting. So, I actually, when I became manager of Detroit in 1997, I hired Jim Nill, who was similar background as I, former player, scouting. But then we hired, a few years later, Ryan Martin, who had maybe played up to high school hockey. He's now the assistant general manager of the New York Rangers, to be in the front office, law degree, work with the National Hockey League. So, in your front office, you got to have a few different dimensions. And I think player evaluation is one of them, whether it's the general manager or, an assistant general manager.
The biggest change, of course, has been the salary cap. And, you need a capologist for the most part as an assistant GM, and really understanding the CBA and every day of the salary cap, and how, some teams, we see them sending guys to the minors just for a day or two to try to accrue cap space. How much did the cap really change how you did your job as a GM?
It forces you just to make decisions, Jason. In 2004-05, the Red Wings had a payroll of $80 million, and then they missed a year, and they came back with a cap of $39 million. We ended up buying out Darian Hatcher. We bought out Ray Whitney. We bought out Darren McCarty. Now, one of the things that I'm proud of is that the Detroit Red Wings, having to go from $80 million to $39 million, we were the last team to miss the playoffs in a salary cap world. Everybody in the league missed the playoffs before the Detroit Red Wings eventually missed the playoffs in 16-17. So I think we went 10 or 11 years in a salary cap world. So basically, when we had a big payroll, we still had we had a budget, and we had to make, you had to make decisions, but the budget, the higher payroll allowed us to, have more players, we have more depth. And as we got into a salary cap world and we were on a level playing field with everybody else, you still had to make those decisions. But certainly drafting and developing, and I think about 05-06 when we went out and signed Dan Cleary, who was looking for work at brought him to camp actually on a tryout and signed him to a 1-year deal at $500,000. And there was 3 or 4 others. Michael Samuelsson was back playing in the Swedish Elite League, drafted by somebody else. We signed him to a $500,000 deal, and Sammy got us 20 goals. Andreas Lilia, we brought him and signed him to a 1-year deal at around $500,000. So, we had to, our pro scouting department had to dig and scratch and claw and find some players that were making the minimum that could impact our team. And I think it's no different today, whether it's a $40 million payroll or it's an $80 million payroll. You're going to need to have 5, 6, 7 players on your roster, whether they're entry level players or they're players that you've signed looking for work that they're near the minimum, that have to positively impact your team. They just can't be along for the ride. They need to pitch in and contribute, and that's certainly the challenge. And I think one of the difference makers in a salary cap world.
Ken Holland joins us, Jason Gregor, Ritch Winter. Now, we've heard Rich's side of things, Ken, and he was obviously a fantastic agent to deal with in negotiations. He said super easy, always cordial, everything was fine. I will get your side of things on that, but he did. I want to get. He's told his version, his side of it on the Marian Hossa deal when it came to Detroit, right, on the 1-year deal, and originally how it panned out. You've been a GM for a long time. How rare was that to have a player not only come to you as a free agent, who's one of the best free agents available, signed for 1 year, and then end up taking $600K less than you'd originally agreed to?
That was very nice of Ritch and Marian. It was a strange negotiation, Jason, because it was really just sort of the beginning of the information on the internet. There was no social media, but certainly you went online. So I remember the night before, the night or two before the free agency, July 1 of the Marian Hossa year, reading online that there was speculation that Marian Hossa was being offered multi-year deals and multi-million-dollar deals. Certainly, we were doing our work in advance, and Marian Hossa was a potential unrestricted free agent, and we thought, boy, he would be a great fit for the Detroit Red Wings. But when I was reading the internet, I thought to myself, I might check in with Ritch in the morning. I might not, because there's no chance. A year later, we had to give big deals to Henrik Zetterberg and I think Val Filppula. We had some people so we had a kind of a 1-year look there where we had some cap space and we could do something. But reading that Marian was being offered the multi-years, multi-millions, we were out. It's around 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. I know I'm at the gas station, heading down to Joe Louis Arena to get ready for free agency. And I'm standing there, my phone rings, and I pull my phone up out of my pocket, and I look and I see it's Ritch Winter. And I look, and there's a sign right above there as I'm fueling, and there's a guy looking out of the gas station, no cell phone usage. So I thought, so I kind of ducked down behind the car, and I said, Ritch, I'll call you in a few minutes. And then Ritch said, I said, I got to drive to the rink. And Ritch said, I got the deal of the century for you. I said, I'd heard that 100 times before. So I ended up gassing, just drove over the corner of the gas, called Ritch back. And then Ritch told me that Marian Hossa would like to come to Detroit. And I said, Ritch, we'd love to have him, but we can't afford him. He said, what do you mean I'm going to give you the deal of the century? I said, what's the deal? He says, a 1-year deal. I said, Ritch, you've got my attention. And I think it was a 1-year deal at 8. And I said, Ritch, I got to get down to the rink. I'll call you in half an hour. I got down, went into Jim Neal's office. My assistant manager closed the door, and I said, holy cow, right? Ritch Winter just called. We got a shot at getting Marian Hossa. And he said, we can't afford Marian Hossa. I told him. And so then I called Ritch back, and I said, Ritch, our highest paid player is Nicholas Lidstrom. Out of respect to Nick, I gotta track Nick down in Sweden, and give me 15, 20 minutes. Let me track him out. I just want to give him a heads up that he won't be the highest paid player next year. And Ritch said, okay, hung up the phone. 5 minutes later, I'm trying to find the phone number to reach out to Nicholas Lidstrom, and the phone rings. It's Ritch, and Ritch has already talked to Marian, and he called me back and he said, Marian doesn't want to be the highest paid Red Wing. Marian will take the same as Nick, or just under $50,000 less than Nick. And I said, deal. So I hung up the phone and told Jimmy Neal, and I still can't believe. So we're sitting there. So now free agency's going on, and It's a couple hours, and I haven't heard back from Ritch. And I said to Jim Nill, I said, Ritch and I have got a gentleman's agreement. I said, I've got to believe. I said, so how can I make this thing feel like it's going to happen? So I said,
Well,
I
keep
come
in
up with
mind,
the idea.
also
What?
was happening at that time. It was a time during faxes. We weren't doing internet. We weren't
Yes.
doing emails. So Marion was simply looking for a buddy who had a fax machine to get the Saints contract back to you. We have no idea that you're panicking, but we think we have a deal.
Yes, and I think I've got a deal too, but I just want to make it. So I said to Jimmy Neal, I got an idea. I said, let me call. Let me call Ritch, and I'll tell Ritch to line up Marion to go on WJR or whatever the radio station was in Detroit, and at 3:30 Eastern time. So I called Ritch. Ritch calls me back 5 minutes later. Says, yeah. Marion's going to be all set. So hung up the phone at, I don't know, about 2:30, 2:45, and 45 minutes later. Marion's on the phone. He's on the radio station in Detroit and kind of confirming that we had a deal. But certainly we ended up going all the way to Game 7 and losing in Game 7. And then Ritch and I talked about a long-term deal. I ended up signing Zetterberg to like a 12-year deal in November.
Franson.
Then I signed Franson, I think in January, to a long-term deal. And I went to Mr. and Miss Illich, and I talked about one more long-term deal. They signed off, and then Ritch and I talked. But we had some, Zetterberg was done, and we had other people to do. And ultimately, the Chicago Blackhawks went. I was around $50 million, and Chicago went to 62 or 63, $64 million, and Marion left us. And but certainly it was a fabulous negotiation for the Detroit Red Wings. We got the services.
But only matched by the Dominic Hasek negotiation in the middle of the season when he walks into your office after getting injured and coming back after he had taken a year off to retire. My biggest.
He did that, Rich. He did that a couple of times. The first time, so Jason, the first time I get a call in the middle of June 2001. Buffalo general manager Darcy Regier, he and I had played together in the minors many years before in Binghamton, so we had a little bit of a relationship. Darcy said to me, Ken, I've met with ownership. We're trading Dominic Hasek. Would you have interest in Dominic Hasek? Well, who wouldn't have interested in Dom Hasek? He's one of the greatest goaltenders to ever play the game.
All right.
So we kind of went through this dance. It was us and St. Louis and a couple of other teams. I remember being on the phone, Jim Nill and I, Dominic Hasek and Ritch were on the phone. I believe it was a Sunday night. Maybe free agency was 5 or 6 days later. And Dom was trying to decide, he had a number of teams courting him, which team he was going to sign off to get traded to. And we were on the phone.
We were really doing that, Ken. That's what we told you. We had already decided on Detroit. We just needed the 8 or 9 million that required us to tell you that.
So I wanted to get Jason, at the end, finally we convinced Dom, or I think we've convinced Dom, or maybe, but he's coming to Detroit. So I said to Ritch at the end, I said, Ritch, now Dom had a club option at $9.5 million. That same year, Lidstrom was making $8 million and Yzerman was making $8 million. So I said to Ritch at the end, I said, there's under one circumstance, or we'll do the trade after we'd kind of gone through everything. I said, Lidstrom makes $8 million. Yzerman makes $8 million. I can't pay Dom $9.5 million, pay him $1.5 million more than the guys who've built this and done it here. I said, we'll pay him the same $8 million. So Ritch called Dom. Ritch called me back the next day and said, Dom has no problem. He'll play for $8 million and he'll give you can have a 1-year deal at $8 million and you can have as many, back then you could do option years. We can have as many option years as you want, so that we always had the option that we could re-sign him or pick up the option at $8 million or walk away. So Dom, that was the first time Dom took less money.
Remember, Ken, we got the difference because we got a Stanley Cup, a bonus for $1 million or $1.5 million if he won the cup. So we made it up there.
We made it up. Yeah, it worked out pretty good, Jason, because we won the cup that year. And we were down 2-0 to Vancouver in round one. It wasn't looking like we were going to win a cup early in middle of April, but we kind of got the things turned around. And remember, Dom put up a wall in game 3 or game 4 in Vancouver. They got a 5-minute power play, and they had a tremendous power play, and nothing would go in, and we ended up kind of going on from there. And eventually, 2 months later, won the Stanley Cup, and then Dom retired. And they had team parties, and I talked to Chelios, I talked to Eisenman, I talked to Shanahan. I said at the team parties, you got to convince Dom to come back. And finally, Ritch called me one day and said, Dom's had it. He's had enough. He got the Stanley Cup. He's going to retire. So then I went out and I signed. That summer, we signed Curtis Joseph, I think, to a 3-year deal of $8 million. And then the next year, after we lost out in a sweep to Anaheim, Ritch called me and he said, Ken, Dom's decided he wants to come back. And I said, oh, I'd love to have him. But I said, I've got $8 million tied up. He says, well, he doesn't need $8 million. He'll take less. So eventually, I think we got him for we played for 6. I think played for 6. So he took a $2 million, and we had an $8 million. Those were great years, Jason. We had an $8 million goalie. We had 3 goalies in the locker. We had an $8 million goalie sitting there, and then I think we had Manny Legacy in the middle making like the minimum, and then we had Dom making $6 million, and then the work stoppage hit, and then Dom went, I think, to Ottawa. And then after a year in Ottawa, 07, 08.
You forgot the best part is the middle of the season. Remember, he got hurt, right?
That's where I'm going to. Now he comes back. Now he comes back and he comes back. And maybe this might be 06, 07, or I can't remember the exact years. So now it's Dom's having groin issues. It's November. Dom's having groin issues, plays a game, and then we give him about a week or 10 days off, and then plays, and his groin's bothering. And this goes on for about a month, 4, 5, 6 weeks. So finally, about Christmas time, or just right after Christmas, I called Dom in the office with the team doctor and the athletic trainer and told Dom that we were going to shut him down and we got to get him healthy. This is hard on everybody. It's hard on him. It's hard on the team. And when he feels healthy, we're going to get him back up and running. So the next day I get a call from Ritch, and Ritch says, Dom wants to see you in your office today. So I said, okay, tell him to come down at 1 o'clock or something. So Dom comes to my office. It's Dom and I. Dom shuts the door, and Dom tells me, he says, Ken, I talked to Ritch yesterday. I didn't come back for the money. I come back to win another Stanley Cup. And he said, starting today, I don't want you to, he's making a $6 million base. He's got about $3 million. It's about halfway through the year. He says, I don't want to be paid another penny until I come into this office and I tell you that I'm healthy and I'm ready to play. And he says, I've already told Ritch that, and it's done. I don't want anybody to know. I don't want anybody to know. I don't want a big story. So we took him off the payroll, and finally, this is 2 months later in March, Dom's getting some bad press. And I finally called Ritch. I said, Ritch, this is crazy. I said, Dom's not even getting paid, and he's taking a lot of abuse in the media. So I said, I'm going out and I'm going to tell the Red Wing Nation there that we're not even paying Dom, that he's been off the payroll for 2 months. And I said, so they can kind of leave him be. And
they thought he was fake. They thought he was just being soft, right?
Yes, exactly. So he never did come back that year, Jason, and ultimately Dom walked away from $3 million, and then and then he went to Ottawa, and then he came back, and then I think he played for like a 750 base.
Yeah.
And the year with the 07, 06, 07, 07, 08, he came and we won the Stanley Cup, and he was playing for like a 750 base. It was him and Chris Osgood. And I think he had like $1 million in bonuses. So he made like $1,750,000, but we won the Stanley Cup in 08. And then he came back on another 1-year deal, low base, like $1 million, and we ended up going to the Stanley Cup Finals. 08, obviously, and 09 we had Osgood and Hasek. It was a great 1-2 punch, but both were playing cheap, and certainly on more 2 or 3 occasions, Dom did right by the team, and it was about winning.
Well, let me just say a couple things because of the background. One, I don't think Jimmy Nill and I ever thought we'd be experiencing what you just described when we were sitting on the bench at the Drumheller Composite High School where we both attended. Two, Dom, reason he retired was, and you probably didn't realize it, Patrick Waugh had said many times in the press, yeah, Dom's okay. He's got the world he's got the Olympic gold medal, but I have the cups. He put so much pressure on himself to win that cup. Steve Kotlowitz and I were down when you were in Carolina for game 5 or 6, I can't remember. And Dom, he didn't go to sleep. You guys played, remember that 3 overtime game? He hadn't gone to sleep till 4:00 in the morning. He was in the coffee shop at 5:30. He hadn't slept at all. He was so exhausted by the time that thing ended. He just couldn't go on. And it was really all because he had to get that cup to put that Patrick Waugh comment to bed once and for all.
Yeah, well, the pressure players put on themselves, I've always thought was a little bit higher than anybody else does. We'll take a quick break. I want to come back because both of you said something very interesting in that segment, somewhat jokingly, but I wonder, in the game of negotiations, we'll talk to Ken Holland about how do you know when the agent's telling the truth and vice versa, and how much does a trust factor and respect factor come into the negotiation and the business of negotiation next. Here on the Jason Gregor Show, it's the Business of Sports on Sports 1440. We continue on Business of Sports here inside the Jason Gregor Show on Sports 1440, Oilers Nation, YouTube, and Facebook, is always presented by PlayAlberta.ca. Busy night in the NHL, 15-game slate. Of course, tomorrow, no games, Thanksgiving in the U.S., so use the promo code Gregor15. You'll get a free $50 play at playalberta.ca, as we are joined by the Hall of Famer, Ken Holland, here today in the Business of Sports. We talked about those negotiations. Ken, I do want to get to like something Ritch said, and Ritch did admit that once the salary cap came in, it was a little harder to play the negotiation game because you knew how much money a team had, how much they had signed. But early in the career, how much of it was trusting and not knowing that the agent was just trying to use you to up the money to get somewhere else? How did you balance that part of it as a GM?
Well, prior to the salary cap world, 05, and I'm not sure how many years go back, and Ritch can go in. First off, free agency was 31.
Yeah.
So you controlled the players, longer before there wasn't this unrestricted free agency at 25, 26, 27 sort of looming out there. So basically the way the system worked back then is, the players that were 30, 31, they made more money when they were 35 than when they were 25. Now it's sort of, you're going to make you're going to make the money when you're supposed to, and then later in your career you don't make as much money. So certainly relationships, Jason, is like anything in life. It's about relationships. When we went through the Dominic Hasek trade in 01, and as you walk through all that, you build up a relationship, and certainly anything that Ritch told me happened. So as you go forward and you negotiate with other players, and it's Ritch and I, you've got a history, you've got a relationship. And that, being as long a manager for 27 years like I was, I negotiated with most of the managers and had a relationship with most of them. And then, then there's new people coming in. There's new young agents coming in, and maybe my assistant manager, whether it was Jim Nill or Ryan Martin, Bill Scott in Edmonton, they might have a relationship because those young agents maybe have more entry-level contracts or more American League players. And, the way I managed was I negotiated the major league contracts, and I had my assistant general manager negotiate the entry levels. And, when I was the assistant manager in Detroit, I was the GM of the Adirondack Red Wings. I thought that was a great experience for me, building a team, signing players, and prepared me for when I was a general manager. So when I became the general manager in 1997, I did the same with Jim Nill. Jim, you're my assistant general manager. You're the general manager of the Grand Rapids Griffins. You build that team, knowing that you got entry level players. We'd sit down and we talk about it. What players were turning pro, and you have to build a team and a competitive team. And then Ryan Martin did the same thing in when Jim Nill went to Dallas, and then when I came to Edmonton, I had Bill Scott and Keith Gretzky do the same thing because I thought it was really good training for them. And at the same time, they're out in the field more than I'm out in the field. So they're out there watching our young players and watching American League games, and so maybe that assistant general manager has got a relationship with an agent who's got more minor league players or more entry level players, and he can work with him. And 10 years later, when either Jimmy Nill or Ryan Martin or Bill Scott are general managers, those relationships go for a long time. That's what happened to me, from 1994 when I became an assistant general manager for 3 years with Scotty Bowman and Jim Devillano. I negotiated the minor league entry level contracts, the minor league contracts, and then 1997 I kind of passed that on to Jimmy Nill.
Well, I think you talk about relationships, Jason, but it works the other way, because when we did the Hossa deal, the one thing I asked for from you, which I had no contractual right to enforce, was that Marion, the minute the season was over, Marion was going to be free to talk to any team he wanted to. So relying on that, because of our relationship, I know that's going to materialize. And that was important to Marion. He's a pretty astute business guy. And that now gives him 2 or 3 weeks to evaluate offers, to talk to teams, to meet them. I find it a horrific experience, July 1st, trying to make a $50 million decision when 5 teams are calling. So Ken gave us that option. And strangely enough, we got a deal with Chicago. They trade Havlat. And Marion says to me at 15 minutes before free agency, Ken, he says, do you think they'd mind if I just kind of looked in and see what the Tampa offer is? And I said, I will call Dale. Sure. And of course, Dale said, what do you have in mind? I'll lose my job. But at the end of the day, it's, if Ken gave us that opportunity, I didn't think for a minute that I'd have to rely on getting that in writing, which he couldn't have done anyway, because it wouldn't, so he gave us that permission. And, that's how you work together. That's why you trust each other, right? When you have a problem, you can work it out. You can rely on guys. And that's not the case all the time.
Yeah. What was there cases in your career, Ken, where you felt that the agent or the player just kind of used you guys as a bargaining chip? And you don't have to name the player or anything, but did you notice that? Do you sock that away, or do you just sense that, okay, that's just part of the business?
Well, I think first off, it's a little bit part of the business. I mean, Ritch can speak more to. I think an agent's job, part of it is to, you're playing one team against the other, and you've got one offer in your hand. I'm only negotiating with the agent, so he could have something, he could not have something, and I've got to make that decision. I mean, that's the negotiation. That's the game, I guess. That
like
we play.
At the end of the day, I don't have to have an offer. You just have to think I do.
Yeah.
Right?
Or he doesn't have to have an offer. Jason, I guess I would say to you, the best thing that you can go into negotiate with is the ability to say no.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
If you can say no and just walk away and feel fine, then you've got the ability to negotiate. But if you are in a position where you've got to have something and whatever it takes, well, and that can just go on. You can either be negotiating against somebody else, or you can be negotiating against yourself, because if you don't get to a certain point, and even if they don't have somebody else, if that athlete and agent have the confidence that they're just going to say, we're going to stick by here, we believe something's coming down the road, and there's some other things going on, and some other teams are going to get desperate in 2 hours and 6 hours, or in a day or 2 or 3, July 1st, then the ability to say no and walk away gives you a bargaining chip. But if you can't say no and walk away, then it doesn't, like you're chasing it a little bit.
Well, and like when you don't have an option other than like back when Buffalo, when Dom was basically by himself, almost leading that team to every victory, they had no choice. Patrick Waugh was making, and when you know that and you're patient, we're ready to say no. I mean, it was surprising to some. I could never understand why goalies were paid less than other superstars because of their position, the amount they contribute to every victory. And so Patrick Wall was making 3.5. We took Dom to 11, just so everybody knows I don't always give the money back just to Ken, just to Ken. But at the end of the day, when it's just about leverage. When Ken has no other options and it's not a salary cap issue, he just has to go back to Mr. Ilitch and say, look, I mean, we want to keep Dom. It's going to be, whatever it is. And I think in Buffalo, I probably could have asked. I mean, Dom Hasek was making $11 million 20 years ago. It's bizarre when you think that Connor McDavid's making 12.5 today.
Yeah, no salary cap, right? The top end guys.
But at the end of the day,
more, yeah.
They couldn't have gone on the ice. They didn't have much more in American Hockey League at that team at that time. They really weren't very good. I mean, and so they had no choice, right? So knowing that, it does, you really don't need much leverage. You got it.
Now, Ken, you know what? Hey, obviously you win and you need I remember you telling me, hey, coaches have told me, Ken Hitchcock, hey, you're only as good as a coach as your best players. You need good players. Obviously, it's a manager's job to get good players. Sometimes they fall in your lap. Sometimes you inherit them. There's lots of different ways. But there's always been rumblings of, well, you know what? How much the players have a say when it comes to player movement. You had Lidstrom and Yzerman and Shanahan and Chelios, and obviously the last few years, McDavid and Draisaitl. Did you ever talk to your star guys before you made a big move, or was that not a position you wanted to put players in?
What I've done as a manager, Jason, starting when I started to become manager in 1997 is, leading up, July 1st is free agency. As I went through that whole process in May and June with our staff, the pro scouts and looking at the lists, and this is before a salary cap world, meeting with Jim Devellano, and then Jimmy D and I would meet with Mr. and Mrs. Ilitch, lay out a plan. And, I would talk to my captain, Steve Yzerman, and I'd get his thoughts. What do you think about the team? What do you think maybe kind of give them a little bit what we're thinking philosophically, not specifically, because you weren't, because some of these people are going to sign. And then, when Steve retired, we got into a cap world, and Nick Lidstrom became the captain in 06 after we lost to Edmonton in 05, 06, and Steve retired and Nick became the captain. I would talk to, Nick in the off season, and then, maybe leading up to the trade deadline, a couple of weeks in advance of the trade deadline, call the captain in, and, whether it was, Steve, Nick, Zetterberg, or Connor, and, give them, I'd want to hear what they're thinking of the team, but also to give them an opportunity to tell me what they're thinking the team might need, and what I should try to do between that time and the trade deadline. And sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't. Sometimes it depends. It's a lot harder in a salary cap world because of the salary cap. But certainly, I felt it was important to be in communication with the captain of my team at the key points in the season, to give him to hear what he's got to say about the team, and also to give the captain an opportunity to tell me what he thinks I should be looking to try to do.
And so I'm guessing then you would say, hey, maybe we need a second pair right defenseman, for instance, or, we need a more physical forward rather than just specific names, because there's no guarantee you can get that specific name, right? So it was more about a position.
Yeah,
philosophically.
Yeah. Do you think we need help in the back end, or do you think we need? Do you think we're deep enough up front, or boy, could we get a fourth line guy that can win some draws and kill some penalties in here, or on occasion we did talk about certain names because it was going to be obvious that certain teams were out of the playoffs, and that team is selling that player, and so you might ask what do you think of this guy, or what do you think of that guy? But I'm just gathering information, and then ultimately, after I've gathered information from my people, from what I think about the team, talking to the coach, talking to the captain, and sometimes it was the captain and the assistant captain. I'd bring a couple of them in together, or two or three in together. And then ultimately, then I have to go back and start to work the phone lines. I'm talking about the trade deadline now. Now you're working the phone lines, but you kind of got to you've put together a game plan or an idea of what you would like to have happen between that period of time and the trade deadline. And then when you push forward to June, kind of go through the same process again. Talk to your pro scouts, talk to your people. You got to obviously, talk to, the people above you, Jim Devillano, Bob Nicholson, Jeff Jackson, the Illiches, Daryl Cates, and, and everybody's got it so that, as you work your way through, you try to be ready to, make a decision. And you got to be, Jason, you got to go through that whole process so that when you're on the phone, you got to be able to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Like if you're not in a position to pull the trigger, like those people go elsewhere, like it's not like you're the only place to go. So you got to, and that's the relationship that you got with the agent, the relationship that you, as a manager, that you might have with other general managers. Maybe you can go back and say, hey, I got to go back and make one call, but but at some point in time, you've got to pull the trigger, and then that manager leaves that phone call and you leave that phone call knowing that you in effect have got a gentleman's agreement, and you're going to turn that gentleman's agreement, at the trade deadline into official, a trade call, and then it becomes official. But you can't, you got to be on, you got to build up those relationships so that they know. Now, over the course of time, you hear the odd story about, something might have happened, and they thought they had a trade. No, they didn't have a trade. And certainly it makes it more difficult going forward in the future to make trades if you if you get that reputation in your circle of people, that your managers that you're dealing with.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, and you kind of answered already, which is great. We'll take one final break. When we come back, there's two things that, like, in the best salesman has to be able to be a closer, and I think some of the best GMs have to be able to make that. At the end of the day, we've had all the talk. Now, either put up or shut up. I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to give up 2 first rounders or whatever it is, and we make those trades. We'll talk about kind of when you learn when's the right time to pull the trigger. Also, how one of your players recently saved Christmas that you might not be aware of. That and more in the business of sports here on Sports 1440, Oilers Nation, YouTube, and Facebook. Jason Gregor, Ritch Winter with you. The business of sports inside the Jason Gregor Show on Sports 1440, Oilers Nation, YouTube, and Facebook, as always presented by PlayAlberta.ca. And our special guest today, of course, is the Hall of Famer, 4-time Stanley Cup champion, Ken Holland, who, of course, was a assistant GM and scouting for over 30 years in the National Hockey League. Now is working as a consultant for the NHL. And Ken, you told us before the break about how, at some point you got to be able to pull the trigger, right? Like whether it's pull the trigger or walk away from a trade, and you sit and you make those deals. And how do you learn when's the right time to make the trade, or even to initiate the trade conversation, where you don't want that to come back and be used against you from opposing GMs? How do you like to be the initiator of trade talk and throw out the first offer, or did you like them to throw out the first offer? How does that work in trade talks?
You know what, Jason, it all works differently. Sometimes, you pick up the phone and you call somebody and I'm going to offer you X for that. Or sometimes you're calling and saying, who's running the trade? Basically, if you're a seller and you're at the deadline and you've got a tremendous hockey player and you can't get him signed, you're running the trade, because he's got multiple people, multiple teams he's talking to, and he's going to kind of tell, here's the basics and here's what I'm looking for. And then if he gets too much, then maybe people drop out, but ultimately, it works towards a conclusion. But, basically trade deadline is, say, early March. Middle of January to late January, every NHL team is having their pro scouting meetings. They're looking at the standings. Sometimes, some teams are clearly in, they're going to be buyers. Some teams are clearly out, they're going to be sellers. And then there's those teams in the middle that need to kind of work the phones, but they're not sure what they're going to do. And then the managers start talking, and maybe you might not talk to 31 managers, because there's some teams that maybe are your rivals and you're competing against them. You're not going to do a trade. But you're going to talk to 23, 24, 25 of the other managers. And what are you thinking? Well, I'm sitting tight. I'm not sure, or I'm going to be a buyer, or I'm going to be a seller. And while I'm looking to be a buyer, you're a seller. Who you moving? Well, we're probably looking to move this guy, that guy, and that guy. We might be trying to re-sign this one. If we can re-sign him, great. If not, we're going to put him on the open market. And then you tell him, well, I've got an interest in that player and that player, but I don't need that player. I'm looking for forwards. I'm not looking for defensemen. Keep me on your list. Keep me posted. Don't do anything without doubling back. I'm interested. Or they'll say, if somebody wants to give me a second round pick, I'll do the first team to give me a second round pick is in. It's sort of a, maybe, a bottom six player. And you're thinking, oh boy, I'd like to give a third or a fourth, but, and then maybe as they push their way towards the trade deadline, they might have a couple teams for seconds, or they got to lower their offer to a third round pick. So it's a negotiation. It's gut instinct, it's experience, it's relationships. It's kind of, assessing the market and knowing, is there going to be 40 forwards moved between now and the deadline, or is there going to be 14 forwards moved? So, having sort of an understanding of the marketplace, which I think obviously is doing your homework and doing your research and kind of working the phones, and ultimately making it. And Ritch is an agent, whether it's finally agreeing to a contract or it's finally agreeing to a trade, it's a process, it's a relationship, and it's gut instinct. And I believe the more experience you have at it, the better you get at it, just because you've been in more, you've seen, how all these things work.
Ken, I don't know if you play fantasy sports or not, maybe golf, because I know you love golf, but fantasy sports has become huge for lots of sports fans. They love it. They're in their leagues. There's 12 guys, 14 guys, girls, whatever. And there's always one or two that are the worst, that just offer you absolute junk all the time. You're like, this is a waste of my time. What the hell are you doing? Did you have guys you're just like, oh man, it's Bob calling again. He's going to offer, and he wants my best player for a second. Or like, did you have guys like that you kind of chuckled and you knew that they were always coming in at like the worst possible offer?
Well, I mean, I think there's guys that they're going to try to start out at the bargain basement there. And
were you one of those guys?
Well, I was always I became a manager in '97. We won the cup. So I think we made the playoffs the next 18 years. So I was always a buyer.
Okay.
And then at the last 2-3 years in Detroit, I became a seller. Traded off Nyquist, traded off Tatar, traded off Smitty, Brendan Smith. And then obviously when I got to Edmonton, we got back to being the buyer. So, do you go in and offer something lower? Yeah, you might. I don't know if it's lower. It might be what I think the player's worth to me. Oh, yeah. And if you can go get more elsewhere, great. And because you got maybe there's multiples that you like, and so it's the reality is, Jason, you got to do business with these people. There's 32 general managers, and you've got to do business with those other 31 managers on an ongoing, regular basis. So I think you kind of figure out in short order. When I came in, Glenn Sather was a general manager, and Harry Sinden was. I can't remember if Harry was there, but there was some of those legendary people were still in the business and have since retired. And you learn pretty quick that you gotta play the game the way the game's supposed to be worked. And then and then as I start to have more years, as younger people come in, they're talking to the Doug Armstrongs and the Lou Lamoriellos and the David Poyles, and they start to learn how the business of being a general manager works amongst the 32 managers.
Now, Ritch wanted me to ask you, do you know how last year at this coming up to December, how Calvin Pickard saved Christmas?
Yeah.
You do know?
No, tell me.
Yeah, Ritch?
Okay, so we're meeting in Ken's favorite spot. I order the tea for him arriving slightly late, as is quite often the case. And he and I have a long talk about Calvin Pickard, and this is sort of the human element of this business. And Ken's is pretty good at this. And we had Adam Ernie here, Ken, and he has 3 little kids, and Ken's doing everything he can, and I believe him, to keep Adam here for Christmas. Right? He's got 3 kids under the age of 4. But he says to me, if you remember, Ken, over at the Tim Hortons, you said, but Rich, I've got to bring Campbell up because we got to see what he's got. We paid him a lot of money, so I can't, I'm doing everything I can. I'm doing everything I can to keep Adam here, but we're going to go to New York and, Calvin's going to get a game. And I remember saying to you that I'm pretty confident. I know Calvin pretty well. I've seen his demeanor. I feel very comfortable. You're not getting Campbell back here because Calvin won't let that happen. I remember you thought, well, yeah, you're being an agent. I appreciate your optimism, but Rich, I'm doing everything I can. I just want you to know I can't guarantee it. And at the end of the day, Calvin played extremely well. Campbell never comes up. And this is where, this is the part of the business that's really hard. And this is what fans don't think about. Here's a young man who might not be able to be with his kids for Christmas because Ken may have to make that decision. Now, a lot of GMs would be sensitive. Many could care less. They've just got to do what they've got to do. But I just remember thinking at Christmas and Adam dropped over and just thinking of him with those 3 little kids that Ken Holland made the effort. Maybe it doesn't work unless Calvin plays well and saves Christmas for the Adam Ernie family.
How much of that, Ken, did you take into the human element of your job as a GM? And obviously you have to understand the person's family, their situation. How much of that is a factor that is beyond the salary cap and beyond the dollars?
I would say I tried to the best that I could, take in that the player has got a family. And even if they're not a family, even if he's single, he's young, they're people. Because I was that person 50 years ago or 40 years ago, however long ago. I played 9 years in the American Hockey League and and then when I having players get called up and get sent down when I was with Binghamton, we were with the Hartford Whalers. So, I guess, whenever, when Rich and I talked about Adam Ernie, I think I'd said to Rich, I'm going to do everything I can to get Adam to Christmas. And it's like early to mid December. And because we had the salary cap and I can't remember exactly, the team was obviously, now we kind of got into that 8-game winning streak, and then we'd lost 3, and then I think we won 24 out of 27. And I wanted, Adam's got, is it 3 kids under the age of 5 or
right. And keep in mind, Ken, the reason this was the problem, because if you bring Campbell up, he has a bigger salary cap hit. You can't keep Adam in the lineup, right? So that was the Calvin's at the minimum.
And I also think Pick was up. Pick's family, Calvin Picker's family was in Bakersfield, and and Calvin was playing in Edmonton. Well, he's missing his family, so Pick didn't want to move his family up to Edmonton, and then find out 3 days later he's going back. So you're trying to. I'm in negotiate or in communication with the players. I'm in communication with the agent at this time. It's Rich. I had many visits with Adam Ernie. Leading up to, and eventually I think Adam went down there just after Christmas and played the second half of the year in the American Hockey League. But I had many visits with Adam Ernie, and then a few coffees at Tim Hortons with Rich about Adam Ernie and Cal Pickard, because
right.
they're on the bubble. They're on the Jason. They're sort of on the bubble. They're not. They're not sure if any day they could go down, and they want to be up, and then they've got family issues, and you're also trying to, Jason. The last thing is, I think if you're going to get the best out of an athlete, he wants to have his head in a good frame versus worried about this, worried about that, worried about hasn't seen his family, worried about this, worried about that. So, but there's also, on the other hand, the team, and you're trying, and the coach, and you're trying to win, and there's and all those other things. So you're trying to juggle all those things to the best of your ability.
Well, I think in that whole year, like the element of the personal element is, keep in mind, remember when Bakersfield came up to Calgary, they played in Calgary for some reason, and then they went back to Bakersfield and came to Calgary. And you gave Adam, you just said, Rich, let him go. I want to let him go home spend time with his kids. So you let him take a week off.
Yeah, we took a week off. He had been down there, I think, about a month, as Richard said. And I looked at the schedule. He looked at the schedule, and then Bakersfield had played one home game in a week, and then they were going up to Calgary. So I called Ritch and I said, Ritch, I'm calling in Adam tomorrow. I'm going to tell Adam. I think they played at home on a Saturday night, like the following Tuesday or something. They were in Bakersfield. The team was going to fly up on the following Sunday, or maybe it was Monday, Tuesday. So I called Ritch and I said, I'm calling Adam in tomorrow and I'm telling Adam to jump on a plane, fly home. Don't worry about the Wednesday home game. We've got lots of bodies there. You spend a week with your family, and then the team will be up. The team will be up because you got to be physically in great shape, but you got to be mentally in great shape.
Yeah.
Playing
Okay,
professional
and
sports.
the funny thing you don't know is, remember, you agreed, even though the team on the road normally stayed in single hotel rooms, you agreed, because Ernie is up in Edmonton with the 3 kids. Adam's coming to Calgary. You agreed to get him a 2-bedroom suite at the Sheraton. You didn't have to do that. You did that, but to me, the real nature of the hardship these families go through was evidence. So I had a room at the Sheraton because I went down to see Adam play. Now I'm going back to my room. I don't know who I met with, but Adam got called up while he was there. And I just remember walking up to my room. So I didn't know where Adam's room was. It must have been on the same floor as mine, because here it is. We're at 11:30, 12 at night, and mom just wants to get the kids home to bed. So I see Ello pushing a baby carriage, holding 2 children in her arms. Adam's got the other one. And you think to yourself, yeah, this is an easy job. And you know what? People don't see the human element, and it's really tough. And people like Ken, at least you can communicate them, and they're better. I think a lot of people don't realize Stevie Eiserman has 3 kids. I have 3 girls. I have 4 girls. So we get to know each other, and we talk a lot about those things. I'm probably the only one that knows that there's a member of the Holland family that has a world record, right, Ken?
Yeah, you got a good memory.
Yeah, and what is the record? It's bizarre, but it was fascinating.
It's running the 100-yard dash. Julie, our oldest daughter, about 3 years ago in Vernon, ran the 100-yard dash, but basically on all 4, it's feet and hands, and then we had to have about 10 or 15 people there as witnesses, and then we had to have it on video. We had the timer, and she got into the Guinness Book of World Records.
Oh, so Ken Holland's in the Hall
I
of
don't know if she's
Fame.
still in there, but it was a world record, and she got put into the Guinness Book of World Records. But just to see my daughter, she's she'd have been in early 30s back then. To see her run 100 yards, that she's running on her hands and her feet and her hands for 100 yards was.
I don't know if I have the video in my phone, because you sent it to me, and it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Oh my God, that's dedication. That is dedication.
I don't even know, how does that come about? I'm going to win the all fours 100-meter dash.
I know, you got to try something. I like it. Ken, it's always great to see you, man. I hope things are going well. It's always great to talk to you, and thanks so much for sharing some time and your insight on the business of sports and in your career. We thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Rich.
Have a nice Christmas, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, take care. Yeah, happy holidays.
There you go. That's a Hall of Famer, Ken Holland. Genuinely one of the nicest guys. Rich, you obviously dealt with a lot of GMs, and Ken Holland is widely respected in hockey circles for really kind of how he treats people.
Yeah, he treats you very well, especially when he needs you. But I still remember sitting in I don't know why I took my kids to Miami in July. We got really good deals on the airfare. We got really good deals on the hotel. It was hot. It was sweaty, but Dom was trying to come back. And if Ken is not sure and doesn't know if he's going to do the deal, it is like the biggest nightmare to try and get a hold of him. So yes, generally a good guy, but sometimes a little more challenging than you might think. And I can remember going back to the hotel room 3 or 4 times every couple of hours. Like, Ken, are we bringing him back? So Ken's really good when things are going well, but it can be a challenge when he's not got a decision, or he's not ready, as he said earlier in the show. He's not ready to pull the trigger.
Yeah, nice.
But good man, really good guy.
We'll pull the trigger on this because this just broke. So we'll get it fixed. We'll take a break. We'll get to Connor Halley. That's another edition of the Business of Sport. Jason Gregor and Ritch Winter. Rich, we'll talk to you next Wednesday.
Yeah, thank you.